We will be introducing a new £800 fine for those attending house parties, which will double for each repeat offence to a maximum level of £6,400. These fines will apply to those who attend illegal gatherings of more than 15 people in homes. The science is clear. Such irresponsible behaviour poses a significant threat to public health, not only to those in attendance, but also to our wonderful police officers who attend these events to shut them down.
It's the UK's national interest to stay part of the EU. We benefit economically from it very much. I mean, I certainly agree that when we get to the referendum, I hope it is a real debate about everything that Europe offers, and you've mentioned quite a few of those things. I mean, I would add the single market and the single trade policy to that, and although estimates vary about how much wealth the single market generates for the UK since we joined, it's probably in the order of 5, 6, 7, 8% uplift to GDP. For somebody on an average salary, that's about £1,500 a year, and most people think that's worth having. And I think when you put it in those terms, there's a very clear benefit that because we don't see it every day, we've kind of forgotten about it, but it is there, and we'd begin to lose it if we weren't part of it.
Taken on the chin. This country is very, very well prepared.
Many more families are going to lose loved ones before their time.
Show some guts.
This has been a disaster, right? Let's not mince our words. I mean, this has been an absolute nightmare for the country.
We have finally ended free movement.
French passport control at Dover has to stamp everybody's passport and check everybody out as a result of Brexit. There's also customs checks and so on. And so actually, this is the biggest exodus we've seen since A, the coronavirus pandemic, and B, Brexit. And it seems that the system is creaking at the seams. So, yes, P&O not helping, but actually, maybe this is something we have to get used to in terms of being checked when you're going across to Dover, from Dover to Calais.
The United Nations Refugee Agency has raised significant concerns about the UK's proposal to send some migrants who arrive here in small boats to Rwanda, saying that it is a breach of international law. Home Secretary's formal instruction to press ahead with plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda, despite objections from her top civil servant.
Short-haul domestic and European flight today, that's because of continuing staff shortages. EasyJet cancelled also some flights, particularly from its main base of Gatwick. They're both blaming high levels of COVID infection.
I think there is very little debate that many of the people risking their lives to cross the Channel are financial migrants.
Wrong. You're wrong. Can we correct this and put the record straight? More than 3/4 of them actually qualify when they finally get processed. They qualify as a refugee. So can we stop peddling this nonsense?
They qualify for asylum?
They qualify for asylum
because they've come from countries like Afghanistan, Syria,
They're coming from Afghanistan, Sudan, Syria, Eritrea. These are countries on the global index as being the most dangerous in the world.
And they're coming from France, basically.
They're coming from France. Yeah, but this is the vast majority of them don't actually come to the UK. The majority of them stay in Germany. I think as of 2021, 128k had settled in Germany, 97k in France, 44k in the UK.
Well, they're a much smaller country.
No, we're not. In fact,
we are actually a smaller country than Germany.
All right,
that is a
so
fact.
let me give you a figure then. So we're actually 18th in the EU for settling refugees when measured per head of the population. So they're taking way more than us.
75% of the public feel that he continually and deliberately lied. How can he remain in office as an honourable man? I'm guessing from what you're saying, you think he is an honourable man.
I do. I think there is very little debate that many of the people risking their lives to cross the Channel are financial migrants.
Wrong. You're wrong. Can we correct this and put the record straight? More than 3/4 of them actually qualify when they finally get processed. They qualify as a refugee. So can we stop peddling this nonsense?
They qualify for asylum?
They qualify for asylum
because they've come from countries like Afghanistan, Syria,
They're coming from Afghanistan, Sudan, Syria, Eritrea. These are countries on the global index as being the most dangerous in the world.
And they're coming from France, basically.
They're coming from France. Yeah, but this is the vast majority of them don't actually come to the UK. The majority of them stay in Germany. I think as of 2021, 128k had settled in Germany, 97k in France, 44k in the UK.
Well, they're a much smaller country.
No, we're not. In fact,
we are actually a smaller country than Germany.
All right,
that is a
so
fact.
let me give you a figure then. So we're actually 18th in the EU for settling refugees when measured per head of the population. So they're taking way more than us.
I said I know of some nurses, quite understandably, and I'm not condemning them, who, after a long day on the wards, absolutely exhausted. This is pre the vaccination being available, pre the antiviral drugs being available, then going back to the staff room and having a quiet drink before they went home. And frankly, I can't blame them.
Well,
but
just
would you call that a party?
Just for the record, I mean, my wife's an A&E doctor, and I can assure you that there was nothing going on in her hospital like that. They were exhausted, completely exhausted throughout COVID. But look, just one other point. There's been a...
Let me say immediately that I've paid the fine and I once again offer a full apology.
The Chancellor at number 11 seems to be in a witness protection programme today. We've not had anything from him at all. When is he going to come out and apologise?
I can't speak for the Chancellor of the Exchequer himself. You know, he's probably as surprised as anybody that he's received a fixed penalty notice as well.
Now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Chancellor Rishi Sunak have been fined for attending parties during the COVID-19 lockdown. Unlawful gatherings held by the government while lockdown measures were in place. Johnson and Sunak are the first Prime Minister and Chancellor to have been fined for breaking the law while in office.
One of the reasons why the Brexiteers were so keen on Brexit was because the European Union was about to bring in moves against tax avoidance, moves against the use of tax havens, and so forth. That is one of the things that drove them so hard to Brexit. And I'm afraid I am suspicious. I'm sorry, but I am. I do think that is perhaps part of the reason why Rishi Sunak ultimately fought so hard for Brexit.
European Union countries have been pretty open-armed, if you like, in accepting Ukrainian refugees. The United Kingdom, by contrast, has put together, despite what the rhetoric from the government is, we've put together a pretty complicated system. The form filling is very onerous. And if I say there are ridiculous things, such as, or should I say, it would be much better if a family only had to make one application. Typically, it's a mother and 1 or 2 or 3 children filling in one application. But we've got a situation whereby even a 2 or 3-year-old child has to have a separate application and answer quite ridiculous questions for a 2-year-old child, asking what sort of former employment that they have been in. Have they been involved in the armed forces. Well, typically, quite obviously, this is not. And all this has translated into a very large number of applications being processed by the UK Visa and Immigration Service at a speed that's horrendously slow.
The Chancellor of the Exchequer has raised taxes 15 times on the British people. Right now, when people are having to choose between heating and eating, between keeping their homes warm in the winter and putting food on the table for their kids, are not going to understand why the Chancellor has whacked up taxes on them while looking at tax loopholes for himself. It stinks of hypocrisy and the British sense of fair play, and I think that is what really offends against how people are viewing what's been going on at number 11 Downing Street.
If you look at the Spring Statement, the Chancellor spent about £18 billion. Of that money, about 2/3 went to benefit people in the richest half of the country. So he actually had the money. The issue is that the government is not prioritising using the money they have to protect the poorest people who are facing the greatest hardship. If you look at the Spring Statement, the Chancellor spent about £18 billion. Of that money, about 2/3 went to benefit people in the richest half of the country. So he actually had the money. The issue is that the government is not prioritising using the money they have to protect the poorest people who are facing the greatest hardship.
She did not want her tax status to be a distraction for her husband and to affect her family. She added, "I do this because I want to, not because the rules require me to."
Well, Rishi Sunak's opponents are clearly enjoying his embarrassment, and that includes some of his fellow Tory MPs.
I think that people who say that there's some sort of xenophobia attached to this are absolutely clutching at straws. There are plenty of people with Indian passports in the UK who don't declare themselves non-dom, who pay all their taxes.
My understanding you touched on Brexit. My understanding, I was looking at the reports today, it seems to be the disruption today is as a result of P&O.
There were long traffic jams before that as well.
There were, but I'm just talking about what I've seen people today saying. Today's disruption, which is what we're talking about, is specifically as a result of the P&O issue.
This form of denial we have today in British politics is the reality deniers of the party.
£300 is, of course, a loan.
It's not a loan. It is a discount, which will then be taken back in the form of a levy.
You're not being given it, you have to pay it back.
No, not necessarily the individual. It gets taken back at the point at which it is levied. Yeah,
sorry, you're all shouting something. What are you all shouting? I'm
saying it's a loan.
It's not a loan.
It's a loan. That's what you're hearing from the audience.
No, it's taken back through a levy. It's not a loan because it doesn't create an obligation on the individual to repay. It is actually a levy on the price point at which the bill.
But they still have to pay it back. What's the difference?
It's put on the price point, not on the individual. The individual does not have an obligation to repay.
Oh, so we can say we don't want to, if we don't want to pay it back, we don't have to?
No, I'm not saying that. It's taken back. It's taken back at the point at which it is charged. Yeah?
So if you don't heat yourself, if you don't have any heating afterwards, then you don't pay it back.
It is not an obligation.
Is that it?
Importantly,
that is it, isn't it? That's what you're saying.
Okay. It comes in this October.
Now, labour shortages and price rises triggered by Brexit and the pandemic could leave the British food and farming industry permanently damaged. That's a warning from MPs. The Commons Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee said crops had been left unpicked in fields, while healthy pigs had been culled because there weren't enough butchers. And they say the government's response has been disappointing. Our Home Affairs correspondent Andy Davies reports.
The problem with overcrowding on pig farms and the fact that pigs keep growing and you can't stop them growing.
For Cameron Norton, the acute problem he faces isn't shortage of staff on his Wiltshire farm, it's the lack of skilled butchers his industry is so reliant upon. There are 250 more pigs on the farm than normal. The backlog is costing him dearly.
The issue is they are fast approaching, if not over, the acceptable weight for them to go into the supermarket supply chain. That means that not only have they cost us a lot more money to feed for this period of time, they will actually be downgraded in value.
Shortage of butchers is just one part of the problem, a parliamentary committee notes today, citing 500,000 vacancies across the wider food and farm sector last summer. Labour shortages caused principally by Brexit, it says, and the pandemic. tens of thousands of pigs have been culled outside of the food chain. Cameron Norton hasn't had to do that, but he's been losing, he says, £5,000 a week since Christmas.
I try not to think about it too much. My wife takes the biggest brunt because she deals with the cash flow. I continue to look after the animals to the best of my ability, as to my staff.
But it's been a hard 18 months.
I've been keeping pigs in my... As a family, we've been keeping pigs since 1958. I've been keeping pigs in my own right for 35 years. I've kept pigs through foot and mouth, through swine dysentery, through TB. This is far and away the most difficult time because we feel that the government has completely abandoned us.
The majority of Russians actually, bizarrely, continue to support Putin. He doesn't need any excuse to ratchet this up.
A is for...
And we're not talking about a number one.
B is for...
Biznatch!
C is for...
Chimp with a machine gun.
D is for...
Dutch apple ass.
E is for...
Enjoy the magic flute.
F is for...
Fuck you, Jimmy!
Fuck you, Jimmy.
G is for...
Gee, that's swell.
H is for...
He defecated through a sunroof.
I is for...
It's gonna hurt like hell, and then you're gonna die.
J is for...
Justice matters most.
K is for...
Kevin Costner.
L is for...
Lightning bolt shoot from my fingertips!
M is for...
Meet Tony the Toilet Buddy.
N is for...
Not all pie sitters cry, but...
O is for...
Oh, people adore me.
P is for...
Bugga, 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 indigo.
Q. Q is for...
Quick question, who here knows what a Chicago sunroof is?
R is for...
Radioactive George O'Keeffe hellscape.
S is for...
It's all good, man. It's all good, man. It's all good, man.
T is for...
They had sex with a head!
U is for...
Use that.
V is for...
Viagra was originally invented to treat hypertension.
W is for...
Well, shoot. I believe I would.
X is for...
Extra roux in the gumbo.
Y is for...
Yep.
Z is for...
What we're doing today is unquestionably the right thing for our country. It's the right thing for the NHS because we've got here in the UK, we've now got backlogs, waiting lists of 6 million people. And that means there's everybody across the country knows somebody who's waiting for cancer treatment or some sort of procedure that is crucial for their health. And we've got to give our doctors and our nurses the wherewithal, the funding to deal with that. That's why we're taking the steps that we are today. And look, I've got absolutely no problem with it.
If you were Chancellor, and you're still Chancellor, and you saw 500,000 kids falling into absolute poverty because of your measures, would you think twice?
I think, look, I'm not Chancellor, I'm the Health Secretary.
Would you like to see our Prime Minister displaying his magnetism with some other world leaders?
Absolutely, yes, please.
Here he is.
That's Britain declaring a no-mate zone.
Key thing here is, and again, there was a whole, like, there weren't any parties, or then they were, but they weren't parties, but I wasn't at them, but it turns out I was. He's been treating us as fools, and he thinks that just saying sorry is good enough. I'm afraid we're not as gullible as his various wives and mistresses over the years. The idea, harsh but I think fair. He thinks he can get away with these things. We keep being told, I've had so many Tory MPs on my radio show who tell me that the heat has gone out of this. I think the audience tonight tells us the heat hasn't gone out of it, and it certainly hasn't for me. And I'm sorry, this is not just about people missing funerals or missing being with their loved ones. It's much more than that. It's about fundamentally taking away our civil liberties. And we were told it was because it was saving lives. Now, key thing here, when people answered an email saying, yeah, I'd love to come to a bring your own booze party and I'll bring the sausage rolls in Downing Street, those people, those dozens and dozens of people here, and they went to parties every week, by the way, when we were all locked in our homes and able to see our family members, they weren't going to those parties going, gosh, I hope I survive. I'll probably die, but I'll go anyway. They knew it was perfectly safe. They knew it was fine. They were young, they were healthy, they were not worried. And yet they imposed those laws on everyone else. And when you have a government and when you have people working in Number 10 who think that there are us little people who have to obey rules, but they're clever enough to know when they're safe, that is when you have an arrogant government and an arrogant Number 10, an arrogant Prime Minister who think they're above us. And I don't think we should ever be ruled by people who think they're better than us and know better than us. And I'm afraid he has to go, because we should have principles in our government that if you lie to Parliament, if you make laws that you then break, you have no business being in charge of this country.
Why do you think the Chancellor didn't increase benefits?
So he has increased the universal credit taper. He did that before the spring statement, but that is already making a difference to households, and it's about £1,000 a year difference. And that's because he wants to...
But you know what inflation is now. I mean, it's over 6%. Benefits will go up by 3%. By the end of the year, inflation could be 9%, 10%.
But that is only one of the areas that we're helping. We're helping with the national insurance threshold. It
doesn't help people on benefits.
Well, it does. I mean, if some people on benefits are actually working and paying national insurance, and that is crucial to understand.
Sally Minton-Meadows.
Yeah, I think, Maria, it's not quite right what you're saying. I think the universal credit is going up, as Victoria says, by 3%. Inflation is much, much higher than that. There was nothing done in the statement last week to expand on universal credit. So I think it's fair to say that the Chancellor is not doing very much for those who are choosing between eating and heating. Yep. And if you look at the overall impact...
I don't think anybody hoped that global Britain could be translated as deals with despots, trade with tyrants, and...
Yes, but I suppose if we were still in the EU and the EU decided to do a deal with India, we'd be there whether we wanted to or not.
Well, if we were part of the single market, part of that big bloc, we would have a negotiating power to hold some of these countries to account in the deals that we signed that we don't have as a much smaller independent third country. So when you're doing deals with other countries and you want them to maintain, say, environmental standards, animal welfare standards, human rights, you've got far more bargaining power when you're going with a very, very big consumer-based offering. I think what we need to remember is that actually we are becoming less trade-intensive as an economy. So our proportion of GDP that comes from trade is 2.5 times slower than that of other G7 countries. We have had falling trade now with our largest trade partner. OBR statistics out this week showing that we've had a up to 15-18% drop in goods trade with the EU. And because that is shrinking, and we are not able to replace that at scale, when we look at the Australia trade deal contributing 0.1% towards UK GDP, and the New Zealand trade deal, which government analysis says could actually shrink UK GDP by 0.1%.
Even Rishi Sunak is saying, and said today, that actually Brexit could have affected trade.
Well, of course, but the trend of less trade with the European Union, more trade with the rest of the world, where the economic growth is, I mean, that's a trend that was for 10 years before we left the European Union. We're now doing more
But we haven't done the big trade deals, have we? We haven't done major trade deals.
I think sometimes you have to make a pragmatic view of the lesser of evils at times.
And I think a pragmatic view would therefore also be to say, while Brexit is done, the Brexit trade deal doesn't have to be done. It's not delivering for UK businesses. It's particularly not delivering for small and medium-sized enterprises, and lots of little tweaks could be done to improve that. We've just had the government say that they're going to delay for the 4th time the introduction of import checks. Why? Because they know it's going to hurt the cost of living.
As Brexit and the pandemic struck almost simultaneously, we all went down. So we all exported and imported much, much less. The others, as we come out of the pandemic, have gone back up to, broadly speaking, where they were before. We've stayed very low. Are you concerned that perhaps because of Brexit that we're becoming more of a closed economy?
There is no natural impediment to our exports. There is no. It is just will and energy and ambition, and that's what we should be doing.
So if we can get this down to numbers 20,000 and below, that's a good outcome in terms of where we would hope to get to with this outbreak.
Some things went well, some things went less well, but I think overall the record of the UK government in dealing with COVID has been pretty remarkable, and I am proud of it.
Talking of parties, Prime Minister, he told the House no rules were broken in Downing Street during lockdown. Yeah. The police have now concluded there was widespread criminality. Yeah. The Ministerial Code says that ministers who knowingly mislead the House should resign. Yeah. Why is he still here? Yeah.
Of course, the Met must, the investigators must get on with their job. But in the meantime, they should. In the meantime, Mr. Speaker, we are going to get on with our job.
Look, there are only two possible explanations. Either he's trashing the Ministerial Code, or he's claiming he was repeatedly lied to by his own advisers and that he didn't know what was going on in his own house and his own office. Come off it. He really does think that it's one rule for him and another rule for everyone else. That he can pass off criminality in his office and ask others to follow the law. That he can keep raising taxes and call himself a tax cutter. That he can hike tax during a cost of living crisis and get credit for giving a bit back just before an election. Yeah. When is he going to stop taking the British public for fools? Yeah.
People have left their jobs because they were found to have breached the law. Should that also apply to the Prime Minister?
Look, the Prime Minister hasn't been handed down a fixed penalty notice.
If the Prime Minister himself is found to have broken the law, attended what were clearly parties.
I'm not going to comment on investigations that are ongoing.
If the Prime Minister is found to have broken the law and is issued a fine, as Justice Secretary, are you comfortable with that person staying Prime Minister?
Susanna, I'm not comfortable preempting, commenting on or prejudging the outcome of any criminal investigation.
As Justice Secretary, you can't comment on whether somebody at the top of government should stay in their job if they have been found to have broken the law.
No, I'm not going to comment on hypothetical questions or speculate on an ongoing police investigation.
Professor Ferguson is a very, very eminent and impressive scientist.
Yeah, you wouldn't have fought to keep him.
It's just not. That's just not possible in these circumstances. The idea that you should, that he should have to resign following something like this, that question has to take into account everything that's going on, like the war, and then there's the economic situation as well.
I do get that,
and
but that will really upset people watching.
The Prime Minister's apologised, but it is really important, you know, when you're as an MP, as a representative of my constituents, you know, once the Prime Minister has apologised, the idea that you should that he should have to resign following something like this, that question has to take into account everything that's going on. Because this isn't the only subject. It is an important subject. Of course it is. And we've just been talking about another important subject. And then there's some huge subjects facing the country, like the war. And then there's the economic situation as well.
I do get that,
and
but that will really upset people watching because, yes, of course, there are other things going on. But to those people we saw at that memorial in central London today, at the memorial wall opposite where you're standing now. You can see it from the House of Parliament. To those people, it really does matter. And, you know, in their eyes, if the Prime Minister broke the law and lied, he should face consequences. An apology doesn't cut it. You can't just confuse it with the war in Ukraine, the Brexit issue. You can't confuse it with all of that.
I'm not confusing anything. I'm being really clear.
I said it was always inevitable that there would be a change in our trade intensity,
quite a significant
with
one,
Europe as a result of a change in the trading relationship. I mean that was expected and unsurprising when you change a trading relationship with the EU. And in general, I think trade intensity is falling. Without a doubt, we're changing our trading relationship with the EU, and that means a different set of controls and things that people will have to do, and that will obviously have an impact. And that, I'm sure, is a big part of the reason why. Because the benefit of new trading relationships takes time. They don't happen all overnight. So I think that's, of course, that will happen over a period of time.
Not able to afford their heating bills, cutting back on hot meals. That's what pensioners tell me, that they're not using their oven because they cannot afford the bills associated with heating their oven, or foregoing hot showers because they can't afford the bills associated with running hot water. That is what concerns me. That is what makes me angry, that for the biggest real terms cut in the pension for 50 years, and Rishi Sunak thinks that's a price worth paying. If he gets bad headlines as a consequence of that, quite rightly, because he is pushing people into poverty because he thinks by being clever that allows him to cut tax in a couple of years' time, income tax, ahead of a general election. That's not right. It's not a price worth paying.
Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight. What's your feeling about the future then?
Blake might all be finished, I don't know.
Homes for the Ukraine. I don't think a single visa has been granted yet, not one visa for that. And one of the reasons for that is the ludicrous amount of complications it takes when you are fleeing and you've left your country, having to upload stuff, get the things. And why are we the only country asking people to have visas? There was this ridiculous excuse that somehow some of these people might be spies or they might be secret agents coming to do that. Well, that doesn't seem to affect any other country. So why are we so special? I mean, it's absolutely, I think it's disgusting the way we treat it. I really do. No, again. I think the problem is just a lack of trust in this government anymore. Completely, everyone I speak to, they're just out of touch. And I think that what's weird about Rishi Sunak is he was the sort of hero of furlough and he was the guy doing incredibly well. And today, in the last couple of days, he seems to be wandering around committing harikiri, really. I mean, very slowly. The stuff he was doing yesterday, I mean, this is a man that wasted 11.8 billion on COVID fraud, not getting any of that money back. And then on top of that, those patronising photo ops yesterday where he had to borrow someone's Kia Rio, because obviously he doesn't drive that, so that he could pretend to fill up, and it was actually owned by someone at a Sainsbury's. He didn't appear to know how to use a cash machine. I mean, honestly, he looked like an alien, and the fact that this guy is richer than the Queen, I think it's symptomatic of what's gone wrong with this government. It is one rule for them and a rule for the rest of us. They're out of touch, and it's time they got out.
Joe Biden is in the room. Boris Johnson's presence is not required. And given that Britain is no longer part of Europe, how much influence does the UK Prime Minister have at summits like this?
Coming to Brussels post-Brexit is a lonely business for a British Prime Minister. Invited to meet NATO members here, but America the guest of honour at the EU summit. Britain not invited. With European countries at odds over the extent of sanctions and a military response to Russia, the UK no longer at the EU table. Does Putin see division or unity of purpose?
We are showing unity. On the NATO meeting, we are showing unity as a defensive military alliance. Boris Johnson, and the UK government are not just part of the EU anymore. That's a choice that we didn't take from our side.
Is that a bit petty of the EU, do you think, not to get Boris Johnson on board?
Well, I don't know what went on behind the scenes, but my own view would be the more inclusive we are in our approach at this particular time, the better in terms of dealing with Putin and this outrageous invasion.
I think this is a very, very problematic comparison, because what the people in Ukraine suffer right now is really a different thing than what Brexit is all about. So putting yourself at the same stage as the people in Ukraine, it doesn't really go down well.
But my point is unity, unity. And the very thing that Putin has tried to do from the beginning, and I've been saying this since my days as Vice President of the United States, is to break up NATO. Break up NATO. He'd rather face 30 independent countries than 30 united countries with the United States of America. Not a joke. I'm being deadly earnest. I believe that's been his intention from the very, very beginning. And so what I want to thank Michelle for is that the whole idea of the unity of Europe as a whole, not just NATO, the G7 and this organization, really matters. It's the single most important thing that we can do to stop this guy who's in our country we believe has already committed war crimes.
Yes? What? He's coming? Quick, hide those newspapers! I will hide them where he will never find them! Ah.
Heil Hitler! Heil myself! Have you read the foreign papers? Look what they call me. A monster! A madman!
And a maniac!
What do they want from me? I'm good-natured. I'm good-hearted. I'm good-looking. Every day, I'm out there trying to make the world safe for Germany. I don't want war. All I want is peace. 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 A little piece of Poland, a little piece of France, a little piece of Portugal and Austria perchance. A little slice of Turkey and all that entails. And then a piece of England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales. Wait a minute, you can't come back here. Nobody's allowed back here during a performance. A little nip of Norway, a little spot of Greece, a little hunk of Hungary. Oh, what a lovely feast. A little bite of Belgium, and now for some dessert. Romania, Albania, and Russia wouldn't hurt. Hey!
Europe cannot stay united without the United States. There is no moral center in Europe. When in the last 2 centuries have the French or the British or the Germans or the Belgians or the Italians moved in a way to unify that continent, to stand up to this kind of genocide? When have they done it? The only reason anything is happening now is because the United States of America finally is understanding her role.
Y habla un dictador, justificando su dominio sobre otros en que sin él todo es un caos. Bien, para Joe Biden, sin Estados Unidos, es más, el rol de Estados Unidos en el mundo es controlar y dominar Europa porque somos inmortales.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Det var fucking hårdt det där.
let me say immediately that I've paid the fine and I once again offer a full apology. And in a spirit of openness and humility, I want to be completely clear about what happened on that date. My day began shortly after 7 a.m. and I chaired 8 meetings in number 10, including the Cabinet Committee deciding COVID strategy. I visited a school in Hemel Hempstead, which took me out of Downing Street for over 4 hours. And amongst all these engagements, on a day that happened to be my birthday, there was a brief gathering in the Cabinet room shortly after 2 p.m, lasting for less than 10 minutes, during which people I work with kindly passed on their good wishes. And I have to say, in all frankness, at that time, it did not occur to me that this might have been a breach of the rules. But of course, the police have found otherwise, and I fully respect the outcome of their investigation. I understand the anger that many will feel that I myself fell short when it came to observing the very rules which the government I lead had introduced to protect the public. And I accept in all sincerity that people had the right to expect better.